Hello YouTube, this is Jesse Ferguson, Canadian folk musician, and today I'm going to show you how I change my strings on my mandolin. Undoubtedly there are lots of different ways to do it, and there are other videos on YouTube if you'd like to consult those, but this is how I've done it for a number of years and it seems to work for me. It's sort of a no-nonsense approach to it, and I'll share some of my tricks that I've learned over the years to make it go more efficiently and to increase safety and things like that. So first of all, why do you need to change your strings? Well, some people who don't play very much or are not very experienced musicians don't realize that you do eventually need to change strings on your guitar or your mandolin or your banjo or whatever it is, stringed instruments with steel strings. Not just when they break, but in order to maintain the resonation and the sustain and the clarity of tone on those strings. So in other words, metal does deteriorate, even brass, which doesn't formally rust, but strings do deteriorate over time. They lose some of their resonance, they get grimy. You can clean your strings, but I think it's better to just change the strings every 6 months to a year. I change mine every 6 months. I know some professional musicians change them monthly or even weekly. I think that's a bit extreme. Every 6 months it seems reasonable, so I put it on the calendar just to remind myself. But that's why you would want to change your strings. And you'll notice if I strum this right now, and maybe I'll pick it up and just play a few chords here. Try to keep that on frame. You'll notice once I've changed them that there's more sustain. Now, if you're interested, I play a Hondo mandolin. Hondo. It's a brand that still exists, but mine's about 13 or 15 years old, something like that. I don't know if the current ones are as good quality as the ones the one that I play. So this is an A style mandolin, so it's probably a little bit different on F style ones, but I think most of the F style mandolins I've seen also have the tailpiece, which is where you remove this little plate in order to access the strings. So I'm going to do that right now. It slides off. I'm trying to do this backwards looking at the camera. See, the way I do it is you want to make sure you don't press down, you want to press only that way to get this off because it slides off. So it can be a bit tough on the thumbs here, but you want to anchor those two thumbs and press out and lifting up a little bit too, so up but not down. And first of all, put on your safety glasses, because if a string breaks, you don't want that flying up at your eye. So that I consider is essential. And it comes off really slowly, but it does come off. And once you can get back, see, this piece comes right off. Just metal. And then you expose this plate, which looks like a cheese grater, and it has a series of hooks. Now, I do this in a simplified way. That there probably are more complicated ways of doing this, but this is how I arrange mine. Whoop. So, now that I've exposed that, this is the bridge. I'm going to proceed with my other tool, which is not strictly speaking necessary, but it certainly makes your life easier, is a winding wrench. You can get this at the music store. Now, I haven't been able to find one specifically for mandolins, so I made one out of a guitar one. These are about $2, made out of plastic. It's just a wrench, so when you put it on the machine head, it does the winding for you and saves your wrist. Because otherwise you have to do it all by hand, which with 8 strings in a cramped quarter is a bit tiring, but it's not necessary to have this. So what did I do? I just took a guitar one and I cut off the piece a bit on the side to make it smaller so that it would fit on the smaller machine heads for the mandolin, and then I wrapped it with tape just to prevent it from slipping off. So that's what that looks like. I've labeled it as Mando. And again, $2 or whatever that costs, and it certainly saves you a lot of effort. So first thing first, again, make sure you don't have any little kids around poking their nose in, because if a string snaps when you're doing this, it can unwind unpredictably and sort of shoot off. A razor sharp piece of wire hitting someone in the eye be a major bad news, and that applies for yourself too. So first thing first is, whenever I'm taking these off, the old ones, I usually like to strum the string before I start winding, so that I know I'm going in the right direction. So you hear the pitch getting deader. So you just unwind all the way until you can remove that string, like so. And then you just pull it off, and I like to coil them up. Again, watching your eyes and watching the eyes of anyone around. A little circle, and then I wrap that tail around just to keep it nice and neat and bundled. Makes it easier to throw in the garbage if that's what you're planning to do, or you can keep these as spares in case you're ever playing out somewhere and you break a string. You can always put an old one on, as long as you didn't cut it too short the first time around. So repeat that. I usually actually do this one at a time. So these are the strings I'm playing. They're D'Addario, and they're not particularly expensive. You see, I dated them November 2013 because I want to make sure that if I buy them in bulk that I'm using the oldest set first. Again, the metal will deteriorate over years. They can corrode as well. So these are just, from the music store, about $8, something like that. So you open the set, and that was one of the G strings off it. So I need the phosphor browns G string. Now, the music stores I've visited don't tend to usually have different gauges for the mandolin strings. They usually have a few different brands, but they don't have different medium, light, etc. like you typically find with guitars, a variety. So these are the loop style ends. So they have a little loop there, which is for hooking over those hooks, the cheese grater hooks in the old set, in the tailpiece. So you take one and you hook it on your cheese grater prong, like so. And here comes the finicky bit where it helps if you have, an established procedure that you always follow. So what I do is I fit this in first through the machine head, and I do it always facing in to out, and all my strings, you'll notice, are wrapped to the inside. You want to keep that consistent if you can. It keeps it neater so that they're not rubbing over each other. So always going in to out. I think that's the preferred way. I imagine maybe you could go out to in, but you'd want to keep them all the same, in other words, so that it's a nice neat series so they're not rubbing over top of each other, etc. So, because of this cheese grater business, they want to pop off the end. They want to pop off the hooks on the tailpiece sometimes. So you want to keep a little bit of tension on it, not an extreme amount, but a little bit, in order so that they don't pop off. And you'd also want to fit it sort of into its groove on the bridge. There's a socket that it fits on. So I just keep that with tension like that with one hand. Pull this down. How much should you leave? Well, on the bronze ones, that's this series on this side, you don't have to leave as much as you do on the other side, because these ones are thinner, slippery wires. They're not wrapped in bronze. They're just straight steel. So they have a tendency to slip down if you don't put as many wraps. Here, you don't have to be as careful. My dad taught me to always do 3 fingers off the fretboard, pinch it there, and then pull the rest. And that should give you enough. Now, the next thing I do is I pull this with my other finger, pull it sharply to create a kink there. So now it's kinked. Here comes my cat. She loves to play with the strings. It's kinked against this peg now, and I'm putting pressure here and pressure there to keep it on its cheese grater peg. And now comes the winding. And normally I would be doing this on my lap actually, but for display purposes. You want to keep this tail, as you see it, it winds around, right? Isla. She'll get quite irritating with this. But if you have a cat, this one may give you some tips as well too, how to deal with them. Now this is getting a bit distracting. As cute as she is, sometimes I have to pull her off the table. So this tail is going to wind around this way. You want it to be over your string so that the string is pushed down towards the headstock. That's what you want preferably, rather than going under it. So as I go, if it wants to go under, then I'll just raise it over. And as you see, it starts winding around. And my little crank here is doing its job. And the same deal, as it comes around again, now there's a fold on this side that's coming around towards the string. So I'm going to tuck this part of the string down again, pushing down. So that way, once I'm able to transfer my fingers, like so, it's all neat and tidy, and the string is winding down, corkscrewing down towards the headstock, which allows for better tension pressing down. So at this point, I'm almost ready to relieve the tension here. A few more wraps. And one reason why I do this one at a time is because I like to get that down to the same pitch. Now, a mandolin is tuned, these are series of strings, right? They're tuned the same way, G, G, D, D, A, A, E, E. So if you do them only one at a time, then what that allows you to do is to get this one to the same pitch roughly as this neighbor, which just helps with the tension on the whole setup. If you take all the strings off, that's not recommended to me because that relieves all the pressure that's on the neck. It's designed to be under pressure, this neck, especially with a mandolin that doesn't have a truss rod usually running up the neck. That could cause some problems of cracking the varnish or cracking the wood, etc. So it's much safer, in my experience, to just do one at a time. That way the tension on the neck is always the same. It's not going to be warping or cracking or whatever might happen. Some people might do it differently. That's always the way I've done it. Guitar or mandolin makes no difference. So, this one I could have probably done a little bit more. A greater number of wraps, that is. Let's see here. But you can see I've got a few wraps. Probably better to do more like the ones that are currently on there. Maybe a few extra wraps. As I said, with these, the phosphor bronze ones, they're not going to unwind because of the great tension and the friction that's created by that phosphor wrapping around the steel core. So I've never had a problem with those slipping, the brass ones, the brass phosphor bronze wrapped ones. It's the steel ones you really want to make sure you just err on the side of putting too many wraps here. So I'll bring you back once I've done that with the rest. Don't bother cutting this off yet, I would say, because you want to proceed with all of them. I'll bring you back whenever I do a steel one just to show you a little trick I've learned there. But you don't want to trim those off until you're all done, and maybe till the next day. That's my preference. But anyway, I wouldn't jump the gun at cutting those off yet. Okay, I'll bring you back once I've done the other 3 in this series, and I'll bring you back when I do one of the steel wrapped ones. The procedure is the same, but there's an extra little step I do on these ones to ensure they don't slip and lose tension over time. Okay, we're back. I've done the remaining strings, all except the last one, which I'm going to show you how. There's a separate step that I do, an extra step I take on the bare steel ones. So that's the A's, the 2 A's and the 2 E's. These are not tuned obviously yet because I haven't got around to that. But one thing I didn't mention before is that as you're laying the string in, you want to be very careful that you get it in the proper groove of the bridge and in its groove in the nut as well. Obviously it'd be all too easy to accidentally bring it up to pitch and then realize later, oh, it's crap, it's in the wrong groove on the bridge or in the nut or something like that, because it will want to bounce around on the neck and in those areas while you're you're tuning it, stringing it up. It's almost like a task where it would be nice to have 4 hands and 2 sets of eyes, so you can keep an eye on all these different parts. Just take your time, relax. That's the beauty of not trimming them off too early, because if you made a mistake down here and it's in the wrong part on the bridge or something like that, you can go back in and fix it without ruining your string. Because if you trim this very short, it's very difficult to go back after the fact and put it back on, I find. You're almost better off buying a brand new string. It's just not having that extra bit of room to play with makes it a pain. It can be done, which is why some people hold on to their old strings. I do that as an emergency measure, but I've never really had it produce good results for me. Another thing you might consider too is that if you're getting rid of your old strings and they still have some life in them, there are some programs out there that will send old strings to people in developing nations. So, you know, some kid on the street in one of these cities could possibly, you know, play his instrument, actually, his or her instrument, if they get your old strings. So it may exist out there. Personally, I play my strings until they're almost ready to be replaced. I can't really see how they'd be much use to some poor kid in a poor country of the world where, you know, you get an old junky string that ends up breaking 5 minutes later. So I just throw mine out. So I've got the last one to do, the last high E. Well, and on the mandolin it's the only E. So what's the extra step? Well, it's the same thing as before. I string it to make sure I'm going the right direction, making sure I'm going down, and I get it to the end, obviously to the point where I can slip it off. It's machine head. These are called machine heads. These gear things, the turning parts are called machine heads. So I slip this off the top here, and you'll notice that unlike the G, the phosphor brown one, it won't just come out. Why not? Well, I can slip it out of the cheese grater part of the tailpiece, but it still won't slide off here, and that's because I've done something additional to these ones, the steel ones, because they do have a tendency, if you're not careful, they will slip off the machine head and lose tension over time. You'll constantly be trying to bring them back up to pitch. So one thing that I've come up with for dealing with that is, and requires me to use pliers to remove them, is I grab this extra little loop that's on here, which is made from the string. Essentially, you have to slip that off, but watch it when you take them off, because they will sort of go, they're like springs, right, basically. So you want to make sure that they don't wind off. I wrap them like I said, and I stick them back in the envelopes, which just makes discarding them neater. So otherwise they tend to spring open in your garbage can. So, what do I do here? Well, this is the tail, in the tailpiece, the cheese graters, some of them run horizontally to the neck, or in plane with the neck, and some of them run perpendicular. These series here run perpendicular to the tailpiece, to the neck. So with the high strings, the steel ones, the high E, I use those, and you line them on the perpendicular ones, and then hook them around. Why do they have those? I don't know. I set up my mandolin the way I purchased it, so I guess it's to alleviate some of the tension that would otherwise all be going this way, and it's redirecting some that way. I don't know, something like that. So same deal. Find it in its groove, bring it forward. Now we have all these other wavy, dangly bits in the way, which is one reason I'm sure why some people would just trim them off as they go, but I'd never do that. So what's the unique part that I do here? It's the same deal. Pull it tight. Pull it tight. Applying tension everywhere, basically. And so now I could just leave it as such and wind the string up. That would be no problem. But because these have a tendency to pull through, I grab the tail, the part that's coming out. It's kinked now, so there's tension there. I've kinked this part against the machine head. So this part doesn't have any tension on it. But I bring it back around and feed it back through the hole again. So what you end up with is a loop over the top. See, there's a loop here now. Now I pull that from this, the tail end, the tag end, not from the other end, because that's already got a kink on it. And I just pull that tight with my hands. And bingo. So now it's pulled through once and back through again and pulled tight. So I guess it's sort of like a half hitch in terms of knot nomenclature. Maybe not. At any rate, from that point, it's the same thing over. So whenever you want to remove that string next time, you pretty much have to stick something in that extra loop, the little D that's formed. You can either grab it with the tip of your needle nose pliers, which you're going to need to cut the strings off afterwards anyway, or less preferably, stick something in there like a thumbtack or barbecue skewer or whatever it is, but you want to make sure you don't damage the finish on the mandolin. So now I just finish off the same deal. And as I said, I want to pull that down under the tag as I'm winding, not over the tag, so that it's winding down, making a nice neat finish. Keep winding down, and make sure you go the right way, obviously. Again, I would be doing this on my lap, which I find easier. If you need to, slide your finger under there to press the string down. Again, you always want it to be winding down. This is the part that's really exciting to watch, I'm sure. But it's a nice ritual changing your strings, I find. It's part of taking pride in your instrument. And you inspect your instrument while you're doing it. Maybe clean it, look for other damage that might exist. It's a relaxing thing to do. And you'll be very pleased with the improvement in the tone and the brightness once you've done it, as opposed to these old strings that have been on your mandolin for so long. You'll instantly be able to tell. Even people who are not musicians will be able to tell that you've changed them. They can tell the brightness and the sustain. So again, pop it into the right groove on the bridge. Right. Make sure this is still in proper arrangement on the cheese grater part, the tailpiece. And so now they're about done. It's all untuned, sounds like crap, but you want to make sure that don't bother tuning it all up as of now. The first thing you want to do is you want to stretch those strings. Let's see here. So what do you need to do by stretching them? Well, some people don't realize, but the string obviously is flexible and it stretches somewhat. It's elastic. So okay, so we've got all of our new strings put on. So should I cut them off now? I would say no. Should I tune it up now? I would say no as well. Right now it sounds like garbage because it's not tuned. But if you tune it all now and get it up to concert pitch and start playing, you're going to have to tune it again in 5 minutes probably. And that little ritual and pleasure will go on for days. Because you need to stretch these strings to their limit of what they will ever experience first, and then bring it up to pitch. And you'll save yourself it going out of tune constantly for days to come. So how do you do that? Well, it's a bit easier on a guitar because you don't have the strings in series unless you're playing a 12-string guitar. But what you want to do, and if you want to skip this step, then that's your choice because you may possibly break a string doing this. But to my mind, you better off break it now whenever you're all set up to replace it with your strings out and etc., rather than have it break while you're at a performance or at a jam or something like that, when you can't conveniently replace it. So that's why I always recommend have 2 or 3 extra sets of strings on hand at your house or in your guitar case or mandolin case, because if you break a string, it's a real pain to have to go down and buy an individual string or a whole set. So what do you do to stretch the strings out? Well, one by one, reach your fingernail in there and separate that one string. Again, wear your safety glasses. This is the part where you really want to have them on. So the 2 fingers, grab it, and with your finger against the bridge here, or against the neck, just stretch it out, in, down, and you can see about how much distance I'm getting there. It's about, I don't know, half an inch, a centimeter, something like that. And I'm really stretching it quite a lot. And you might want to cringe when you're doing this, because your tendency is to think it's going to snap on you, and it very well may. But if you don't do this, then you'll be kicking yourself for so long, because it will always be going out of tune. So same deal, all of them. We'll see, hopefully none of these are going to break on me. But if you tune this up and did this after, you'd see that they all drop in pitch substantially. So you want to just do this and get it out of the way, because as you're thrashing on your instrument, you're going to be stretching those strings anyway. So you can either do it over time, over days, which is maybe safer, or you can just get all that stretching and working in out of the way. If you've got a flawed string from the factory, one that's just a dud, you're going to find that out now rather than find out at your next jam session or gig. So I'm really pulling quite hard on that. I rest my hand against the neck and pull against that, so I'm rocking. Make sure you do them all. And that's where you'll also be able to tell possibly if one of your windings is not tight enough or it's slipping. So all the way down, maybe a little bit lighter on the high E, on the E, just because it is a lighter gauge, right? So you can reef a bit more on the G's than you can on the A. So same deal. Might as well get it out of the way now. You got safety glasses on, you shouldn't have to fear too much. So there we go, none of them broke on me. And now it's going to be substantially lower in pitch. And now's the time when you want to tune it. So, get your digital tuner. Make sure you know, I also have a pitch pipe here, a digital pitch pipe, which has the advantage of, because, well, for one thing, they're extremely out now. So if you turn on your digital tuner and it's going to be seeking for what note you're playing, it may mislead you, because it's going to possibly read what should be a G as, well, whatever, something else. So what you want is possibly that pitch pipe. You can do it with just your tuner. So there's the G note I want. And then you gradually bring it up to that. Then switch to the D. Don't bother getting it too perfect now. To the A. Now if your ear is not trained enough to be able to do that by ear, then just use your digital chromatic tuner, which will pick out the note for you. It'll tell you what pitch it is supposed to be. And now you're probably going to have to go back and do it all over again, but now you can switch to your chromatic tuner, which this one actually does have the option of playing the tone for you. Now you can go back and actually get it perfect, or damn near. I would still do it not bother to get it too perfect yet. if you find this video too exciting, I think they probably have some on paint drying you could check out. Now even so, I'm going to have to go back through and do it one more time. Another thing you want to remember about tuning your instruments is you always want to bring them up to pitch. It almost never works if you're sharp, to bring it down, because the string is still going to relax after you're done. So if you overshoot the mark, you've got to back it off. And bring it up. And that applies again. Most of what I'm talking about applies also on guitar. Now we're getting close there. Well, we'll spare you the tediousness of trying to get it perfect, but for now it's good enough. And you can tell that it's got more sustain. So what's left? Slide the tailpiece back on. Watch that your strap is turned sideways, otherwise you're going to capture it with the metal of your tailpiece. And again, slow and steady is the idea there. You don't want to slip and mar the finish of your mandolin. It requires quite a good push there on mine anyway. So that's nice and neatly done. Now, is it time to cut those strings off yet? No, I wouldn't do it yet. Just in case there's some problem between now and tomorrow where it wants to slip or something like that. Because once you cut that off, you can't put it back on. But just for the sake of showing what it looks like, I'll do one of them now. Again, these brass ones are very unlikely going to give you any problems, so we can trim those off. Use your wire snippers or your needle nose pliers. Where are we here? Whatever you've got. You got to use obviously the cutting part here. You bring that close. Be careful you don't cut, the actual strings that are under tension. You got to cut the right part. Watch what you're doing. Bring it close down to the string and just cut it off. I'll do another one just for illustration's purpose. Make sure you don't nick the other strings, the parts of the strings, with the tip of your needle nose pliers, because that will create a weak point, obviously, that might snap on you. So I could probably do these brass phosphor bronze ones here. Very easy to nick your instrument or make a mark, so you gotta be careful. Some people like to leave those tails on all the time. I think it looks a little bit ridiculous, and it also creates, again, if you've got a small child or a pet or something like that around where you're playing, all of a sudden you've got these razor sharp little pieces of wire that are going to poke somebody in the eye. They also don't fit in your guitar case well. They have a tendency to scratch up the finish in micro ways. So, some young guys like to do that with their guitars and they think it looks cool, but to me I think it's a bit of a, well, it's not worth it. So, that's basically it, how you change your mandolin strings. And here comes you-know-who again, looking for trouble. She loves to play with them. If you have a cat, you got to watch out, because their eyes are just as vulnerable as ours. They've got better reflexes, but she loves to play with the strings, and she'll jump up and bite me, or claw me on the legs if I've got this on my lap. So be aware of that. You don't want to drop your instrument when the cat jumps up and claws your leg trying to get the mandolin strings or guitar strings. So anyway, I hope you found that useful. Again, there are lots of different ways of doing this. I've been doing it this way for years and years. I never had any problems. So just bear that in mind. Slow and steady. Try to do neat work. I mean, this job is not the best work I've done. I've been more consistent with my raps before, but this won't cause any problems. I'm almost positive. So you can make it as fancy and as complex as you want, or you can do it in a simple, straightforward way and just get the job done. But like I said, usually about 6 months is probably a good routine. If you have a guitar at home or a mandolin, you don't know how old the strings are, and they sound dead, and they look green and grimy, it's time to change them, Break the bank. For $10 you get a nice new set of strings, and they're a lot less likely to break on you when you're playing, when you want them to work, if you keep them, fairly up to date. So every 6 months, you can check your smoke alarm at the same time. That's what I do, and put it on the calendar. And yeah, it can be a fun little ritual. You set aside, 15 minutes to half an hour to do it, and you'll be start to finish done, and you'll be glad. It'll sound great for, at least a month or so. You can definitely tell that it's fresh and bright, the sound of it. So if you like this one, you can check out also my introduction to mandolin. I have a whole video on how to play it for beginners. And I also have some introductions to other instruments and my own music posted. So my website is www.jessefergusonmusic.com. I'll put a link somewhere around here. And thanks for listening. Bye.